Hello, class. This is Professor Suarez, and we're going to be talking about a very important subject today. Um, Increasing your income and advancing your career. And we're going to utilize some of the key components in Chapter 4 to bring this up, as well as the quiz, to really go through some of the key components to doing that. So let's get started. So one key component you want to think about is your reputation. And if you think about a brand like McDonald's or Honda or Netflix, those are things that are associated with consistency. It's associated with something that's common that everybody knows about. But you don't usually think of brand being associated with your reputation. But that really is what it is. Um, you ever heard the saying, your reputation precedes you? That's because the reality is, before anybody um, in your work or your career or your field decides on whether they want you on a project or they want to work with you, they may ask a coworker or somebody who's worked with you, oh, what do you think about so and so? How does he work well with other people? And your reputation arrives before you do, because they will tell that person how it is to work with you and how you carry yourself. So it's very important to start thinking about, as far as communication, what type of reputation you're communicating. Um, so you think about how you present yourself, how you present your ideas, and how you can communicate effectively. And also how you could communicate that you're a value to the team and an asset to the company. And these are things that we're going to be looking into today. To develop effective communication habits, there's a couple things you want to start doing before you communicate or send anything out or present anything. And these are some of the steps that are highlighted in Chapter 4. So the first step is research and planning, and they actually separate this into three steps, right? So the first piece is plan, analyze the situation, figure out what is the context that you're working in, um, as far as company, department, problem, situation. Um, some people do SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to really analyze the situation. You could even do it backwards, toes, right? Threats, opportunities, weaknesses, and strengths. And you may think, well, what's the difference? It's one or the other. But taking the approach from outside in could give you different perspective than looking inside out, and could also present some other opportunities that you might not have seen looking at it from one perspective versus the other. Not only that, you want to gather information and do your research. This could encompass having multiple sources of information and multiple experts and analysts reviewing the information that you're presenting. Um, I can't tell you how many times that I've had to do research in order to make sure that I got my point across and I was confident in what I was presenting. Because there are times, I mean, in the professional world, where you come across people who are always going to disagree with you and always going to want to show you up in front of the supervisor. So if you have your information ready and you're prepared, there's nothing that could come against you that's going to limit you or stop you, because you know what you know. And you could come with the affirmation and the assertiveness that's necessary to say, hey, listen, I'm a value to the company. This is what I have to offer, and this is what it is. This is what's right. We're gonna do it this way. Um, and there's no bigger authority. There's no better authority than knowing you're right. And there's no more empowering feeling than knowing you're right. The other piece is select the right medium to present the information. Sometimes an email isn't enough to really get the information out there. Sometimes you have to develop a PowerPoint, develop a video, uh, get some content together to really present your message effectively. This is something to think about. And later we're going to talk about some of the pieces that go into those kind of decisions. Uh, and then you're going to want to organize the information the right way, make sure that it's concise and it has a good flow. Write it out, make sure you have every idea and piece articulated properly. and then you're going to adapt to your audience. Sometimes you're going to have to develop it in a certain way or say it in a certain way that's going to appeal to the people that you're talking to. And it's something that if you don't think about, can end up biting you in the butt really quickly. Um, and this is some of the steps that you could take to be an effective communicator. And this kind of has to do with the research and planning aspect. For the actual execution of the presentation and the follow-up, those are other pieces that reflect, in essence, you seeing how you actually did and seeing how those people perceived it and how effective you were. And what's great about execution and follow-up is you could always improve those pieces, and the follow-up actually helps you to improve the other aspects of your communication. You could always ask people, hey, how was my speech? Was it good? How was the presentation? Did you understand? What did you get from the message? And these are things that you could always tweak and improve, because you're never going to get it the first try. It's going to take a couple attempts and a couple practices for you to actually get better and better and more concise. Now, in picking the best medium, some things to consider are these following aspects. Media richness, which is a term used to describe what is actually being presented and received by the people who are in your audience. As far as the spectrum of different ways information is taken in. Another way to say this, like we have 5 senses, right? We have taste, touch, hearing, seeing, and smelling. So there's media that appeals to hearing, radio, right? So there's, that has a limitation to what could be done. You can't see things because of the radio. You could imagine things, you could speculate what it looks like, but audio media is limited to just sound. Video is limited to just vision. And if you want to show somebody a product, or you want to see somebody's facial expression as you're talking, then that's something to consider with the way that you present. And as far as the media richness and a combination of the media richness, if your product is food, you want to have samples of the food available for the customers or the people who are going to be potential sponsors to taste that. So that's also a part of the media and a part of the presentation, and something that you could consider and actually use to create a very creative and distinct presentation. The message formality. Are you going to be talking off the cuff? Are you going to be presenting in front of an audience of 1,000 people? Is it going to be an online classroom presentation? All these things have to be taken into account because they impact the language you use as well as the format and flow of the conversation. A speech that a best man gives at a wedding is going to be very different from a presentation that's given to a boardroom, and that's just because of the formality, right? Both are formal locations for presentations, but they're not to the same audience. So something to think about. The media limitations, which we described previously with radio, you can't show a visual object as far as the radio is concerned, but also limitations as far as timing and the amount of content that's actually going to be up. On an email, it doesn't make sense to write 10 pages or a novel, because emails are meant to be concise, small, and succinct places for information. So those are some of the limitations with the media that are not so pronounced, but things that you have to take into account. Urgency, timing, cost, the audience's preferences. These are all things that if you take into account are going to make you an expert communicator, and also, sharp, tactful, and efficient, which are all things that people look for as far as people to work with and people to put in leadership positions. The hardest thing probably is limiting your scope, because at times you may find that it's important to cover all aspects of the concerns. But the reality is you can't please everyone. And when your scope is too wide as far as what you want to accomplish, whether it's for a project or just a presentation or a pitch or anything, that is going to become encumbersome and it's going to overwhelm you. Limiting your scope, limiting the amount of information that you want to get across, and the time frames that you do that could make you potentially more effective than somebody who's trying to address everybody's concern and all the possible questions that a person could have about the subject or the material you're presenting. And also utilizing multimedia auxiliaries. This could be PowerPoint presentations or pictures or images, can help relay the message better than sometimes even words and sentences can. So using a mix of these things could actually benefit you and can make you very effective as far as communication. So with that being said, it's important to highlight some of the key pieces that I want you guys to take away from the quiz. Being in a classroom, in an online classroom at that, gives us a different opportunity that isn't available to us under normal circumstances. And what I mean by that is, as far as learning is concerned in the situation that presents itself, there are things that could be done that wouldn't be done normally, that emulate or sometimes could give the instance or the feeling that there's a risk of loss when there's actually no loss involved. And it allows us to answer things honestly and succinctly. So what was done with the quiz was it asked you some questions to consider some situations that most jobs and most careers and most businesses consider when they're hiring people. And as far as failing, it's impossible to fail this quiz, because just answering it, you get 100 because you participated. And that wasn't unintentional. It was intentionally not put out there that that's how it was going to be graded, because I still wanted to give the feeling and the sense that there was some risk. But in doing so, you answered honestly and under duress, the same duress that you probably would have had if the situation had presented itself at work. Not entirely, but it was able to be recreated. And yes, it's a trolley way to do it. But I think based on what we're going to review now, it's going to end up benefiting you as a student and also benefiting you in your career. Because we're going to review some of the key pieces to increase your income and increase the way you present yourself and the way you carry yourself. So let's review this question here. You find that a worker is continuously coming late to work. Due to the nature of the job, you are not required to clock in your hours. But you have noticed that the coworker does this every day or every other day or so. Who hasn't experienced this before, right? How would you approach correcting the situation based on the circumstances? So this is actually asking about a couple things, right? Conflict resolution methods, whether you're introvert or extrovert on the situation. And the most extrovert and probably least agreeable person would pick, I would scold him about arriving late and warn him not to continue that. But the interesting one, the majority of you guys pick, I would have a conversation with my coworker and see if something is keeping him, which is, more of an extrovert, more personable approach, which is completely fine. The other one that's interesting is I would have a meeting with him and his supervisor. This is more of a leadership approach where, you're trying to kind of make amends but you're still kind of the villain in a sense because you're snitching on them, right? And then the blue is, I would ignore the situation. It's kind of introvert approach, like you just don't want to deal with it because again, if they really put an importance on time, they would have put a policy. And there's many ways you could quantify the reasoning, but here you see that there are different ways to approach the same situation. And why would this be important to a business, right? Depending on the type of business, they're going to be looking for introverted people or extroverted people. And as far as places of work that highlight that they have large amounts of conflict, and they need to know how to deal with conflict resolution, primarily customer service or politics or project management, where you're going to have different personalities, especially with engineering, waste management in particular. They have a lot of different disciplines coming together to develop new processes and new procedures. All these things tie into how you deal with other people. And if the position requires you to have to be more of an extrovert, then the extrovert answer is the right choice. In cases where you have to work alone and focus on your own aspects, the introvert is probably more desirable, but in most cases that I've seen, you always have to work with somebody, you always have to answer to somebody. So the blue answer is probably the worst one you'd want to pick. So if you pick the blue, there's no wrong answer, okay? So this question is interesting because it talks about the aspect of agreeableness, the importance of being liked, and how much it impacts you and may impact the revenue of the company. So let's look at the question. A customer comes into your place of work irate about a service fee they received for using your company's products. They say that when they sat with your coworker, they hadn't explained the situation with the fee, and I was charged once a month, and demands a refund. What is the best way to approach the situation? So a couple of things to think about. If it's a monthly fee, even refunding the fee for the month that they were charged, unfortunately, that doesn't solve the problem because they're going to get charged another fee next month and the following month after that. So to refund the fee doesn't solve the situation. However, if it's to the extent of the customer feeling wronged and you want to right that wrong by returning the fee and showing them that they're valued as a client, then sometimes that might be the right choice and the right approach. But what we're looking here is to see if let's say, for example, the customer is already irate and you want to be liked by this customer because you potentially see yourself either having a relationship with this person to provide them future services, or you want to make sure that they feel like I said previously that they're valued as a customer, you would give them the fee, right? And a good portion of you chose the options that gave them the fee, the green and the blue. Get a manager involved to refund the fee, or the green was to connect the customer with the employee. But that's not the approach that a business would want you to pick. Why? Because if the business makes money providing a service, right, and you're returning a fee to every customer that comes in upset, they're not going to make money. So a company is looking for someone who has the later two options, that they explain to the customer what is the service that's being provided, or they empathize with the customer and try to help them or affirm to them that this service or this product is worth the value that they're paying. Because a lot of times when people are upset about fees or things that they have to pay for, it's not that they're upset that they were charged it, but they have a disconnect in the understanding of the value that they're paying for, right? And this requires you to sometimes be disagreeable, to say, no, we can't refund the fee for you because when you signed up, we provided a contract and this is what the contract stated. Or we provided the service for you and from what it looks like, the service was satisfactory. just that you were charged a fee. But that's the fee associated with it. Or, Mr. Customer, I do apologize for the inconvenience, and I do understand how frustrating it is to see a fee that you didn't want. But if I may, is it okay if I show you the value of the service, which I'm sure you're aware of, corresponds to the fee, and I could also explain to you why it's charged every month because of the cost associated with providing the service. And if you find that this isn't something you need, we can go ahead and refund the fee for you and cancel the service. Those types of things and that type of conversation, though disagreeable, does show that you're stern and it's respectable. And if you come from a place of honesty, it's a lot easier to do that, right? And this is something to consider as far as this question. Another piece about disagreeability was this question here. If you're in a meeting where your supervisor is presenting information that you compiled, towards the end of the meeting, this is an incorrect data point that they present, which may or may not change the way that the board makes a decision on a decision that they have to make. What is the best way to approach this? So oddly enough, a majority of people pick the approach that's most disagreeable, where it doesn't really take into account the feelings of the supervisor, but takes more into account the importance of the decision, right? Because the yellow one was wait until the end of the presentation and just announce the correct one. Be like, this is actually the data point. And then there was another one where you raise your hand to interrupt and quickly point out the mistake on how it's a easy mistake to make, but it's actually this number here, right? Not considering that it kind of makes the supervisor look a little bit like, how you get that wrong, but that's the disagreeable answer, because you're not taking into account the feelings of the person who's making the presentation. You're taking into account how this is going to impact the company. I mean, 19%, a fifth of you did nudge the supervisor and say, hey, listen, this is actually a number, but that's pretty embarrassing too, because it still makes him look bad. The agreeable one, so that way he doesn't look bad, was to write the email out and announce this is the actual data point, just in case there was some confusion about that before. But since it's the end of the meeting and they have to make the decision, it does put the company at risk, and that the supervisor might say, why didn't you say something before? And the reason I bring this up is because of the following. Success in a career depends on, or how you're successful, and the things that you do to be successful depends on the role you're in. So a lot of the questions talk about temperament, introvert, extrovert, agreeableness, the way you approach conflict, but those things depend on the careers that you pick. If you're a salesperson, a supervisor, a CFO, a politician, a musician, all these things, a professor, all these things require different temperaments and different ways to carry yourself. For example, if you're a lawyer, you're going to be dealing with high stress cases, high stress situation, working long hours. So somebody who is calm and collected in those times would probably do a lot better than somebody who panics at every conflict in every moment. And at the same time, you don't want an agreeable person to be defending you in a case where the prosecutor is saying this person is a lunatic, disheveled person, a chaotic mess, and your lawyer is just agreeable and says, I don't want to ruffle feathers, but I don't think that's appropriate. You want to be like, no, you are out of line. I object. You want somebody to fight for you, So agreeableness, though it might seem like it's a better trait to have because it implies empathy and kindness and taking into consideration of another person's feelings, there are times where that is not appropriate. And the times when it's least appropriate is when it comes to pay. Apparently, there's a study that says that agreeableness is a is a big determinant to whether you're paid more or less than another person. And why is that? Because agreeable people know when to say no. They are stern and they get their point across. And at times, it's very easy for us, in particular, any professional, to say, you know what, I care what this person thinks about me. I care how this person feels. I want to take that person's feelings into account. But when it comes to money, that might not be the best approach all the time. Sometimes for a salesperson, you have to be empathetic. You have to be able to transfer the emotions of assurance and confidence to the clients that you're selling to. But when you're a supervisor, when you're a CFO, when you're a COO, project manager, and the project rides on you, I'm sorry, feelings out the window. You have to get the job done, and there are people that will take advantage of the fact that you care what they think about them, right? And this is an important lesson to learn, important lesson to think about. As a professor, I should be agreeable. You'd hope I'm agreeable. If you're laying an assignment, or if you need help with understanding some meaning or some aspect of schooling, or if you just need somebody to counsel you through the hard aspects of your education, you could only hope the professor is agreeable. But if you're on Wall Street, or if you have a project, you're a project manager, or if you're working on a house and you need to get these people to work, I'm sorry, agreeableness is not something that's demanded by the consumer, right? So these are all things to think about, especially in your career and what you want to do, to take into account what is the type of person that I need to be successful, okay? And what the quiz tells us, based on majority of your answers, is we tend to avoid unnecessary combat and conflict, but in some cases that bleeds over into necessary conflict. And depending on your position, sometimes you're going to need to have difficult conversations. What this class teaches you is how to do that effectively and efficiently, right? You're going to have, times that you have to step back and look holistically at the situation, look at the value systems and look at it quantitatively and not qualitatively, right? And what I mean by that is, when I say qualitative, I'm referring to the quality of the environment, or the quality of the conversation. And mind you, I don't mean to be disagreeable you have to disrespect people. I'm not condoning the ill language that has breeded resentment in our society today, that some people may see, wow, this person is very successful even though they're a jerk. I don't condone being a jerk for no reason. What I condone is being effective and being efficient and getting your message across. Should it be by any means necessary? Sometimes the situation demands for that, but if you do it excessively, you burn your bridges really quick. I have never personally experienced that, but I've seen there are people that I no longer deal with because they're just so disagreeable, and that's something to take into account. But if you are able to step back and view something holistically and say, this situation calls for me to be stern and to, set the precedence and say, this is exactly what I require, you're going to end up on top more times than not. Value what's right over someone's emotions. Sometimes, and I think this was a key component to the diversity piece, you have to speak honestly and you have to speak from a place of truth. And when it comes to your education and your learning, you want a professor, you want a supervisor who's going to be critical but constructive and take the time to really build you up as a a successful force to be reckoned with. It's one thing to be a force to be reckoned with and be unsuccessful, but you want to make sure that this person's building you up to really do some damage and do some great good in the world. But unfortunately, there's going to be times that if I give you guys a low grade, or if there's an assignment that I feel needs work, you're going to be upset because you're like, I put all this work into it. But unfortunately, if we're going to get to a point where we're getting better, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm going to say, you know what, this needs work. Do it again. And we have the time to do it. So take advantage, Being disagreeable, like I said before, is just, for us sometimes, it's only justified when it feels wrong. So in a sense of revenge, to get justice, then we can be disagreeable. This person, reprimanded me in front of the coworkers. That's unacceptable. Okay, that's an instance where it's okay. And you may feel that you have to ask for a raise or to ask for vacation time for your kids. That's hard. You have to be disagreeable. A business does not want to give you free time or more money if they could do it, if they could have you work the same amount for less money and less time off. But if for your sake, for your health, and also for their benefit, you sometimes have to make a case that, hey, I need this time for my family. I need this money to be able to sustain myself, to be able to work effectively. And, it's not inherently innate in most supervisors or managers that that's something that you would need, because, again, they're worrying about themselves and worrying about their pay, which is just the way things are. But you have to set the effort and set the precedent and do that. And you don't need to wait for them or you don't need to wait for them to take advantage of you, or for you to feel like you're being taken advantage of. You have to do that at the moment that you realize that this is what you need. And what I realized based on this quiz is nobody really has the strength or the confidence to say no. And sometimes that is the most important piece. There was a time in my career that I said yes to everything. I was the guy that's like, yeah, sure, yeah, I'll do it, yeah, it's fine. And a coworker of mine says everybody wants the fountain of youth, but nobody wants to pay the price. And your time in your youth is so valuable. You have to give yourself importance and be able to say no. And people will respect you for it, more than if you say yes and don't show up, because your word is your bond. Your reputation precedes yourself, right? And the last piece is a small portion of the answers are concerningly passive-aggressive. There are some of you that have picked the passive-aggressive answers, and I would be concerned if that was a consistent choice. So taking a step back and saying, am I passive-aggressive? Do I hold some resentment? And do I wait to hold some resentment to be disagreeable? And is that the best approach? Because the reality is it's not. And you're going to end up, resenting the world and the careers and the opportunities you have without really fully giving it that 100% attempt and that 100% try. Some of you might resent me because I gave you guys a low grade on some of your assignments. But remember, every assignment has the opportunity to be resubmitted. And I want you to resubmit it. I want to take the time to see you guys grow. I grade, the way I grade is based on your trajectory and your growth. So if you do poorly in the beginning and do very well at the end, I don't see any reason why you can't get a B plus or even an A, depending on how much that growth happens. So, don't give up on yourself, because I haven't given up on you guys. But with work and with your careers, same thing applies. If you have a supervisor that's a excuse my language, a hard ass, and he's on top of you, but he wants you to do good work, don't give up on yourself, because that might be the opportunity for you to actually learn something and be able to develop yourself in such a way that you could give back to that company. And if, God forbid, you get fired or you decide to quit and move on, you can still take those lessons on with you and provide value to another company. right? So all these things, I hope this is what you can get from the quiz, because this is what I got, and this is some insight that I could give you. This is probably going to be the only quiz that's like this, unfortunately, because it would be great if I could just give you guys all hundreds. But for your sake, there's more to come. This is the last trolley thing that I do. The first trolley thing was that extra credit assignment, which again is still available, but this is the last time I troll you guys. Okay. And here is success in the career. So again, um, this is the area you want to be at, right? Have the ability to say no, and conscientious. And conscientious means that you are not only self-aware, but aware of the context that you work in. So much so that you could develop the proper protocols and guidelines to be able to effectively deal with every situation. So you want to be right here, boom. I know exactly what to do with this problem, and I know how to solve it in the most effective way. And here, so that way when people disagree with you and tell you the wrong thing, you have the research and the information to say, you know what, I respect your opinion, but this is actually the way it's going to happen, and we're going to do it XYZ. We're going to do it in XYZ in the time frame that I've already set. And people will respect you, and you'll get things done effectively. But this is not, again, empty tricks where you just pretend that you're conscientious, you act disagreeable, because if you fake it, that's the easiest thing to really pick up on, and that's the last thing you want to be known for, as a fake. The other aspect that really determines success is creativity. The quiz doesn't test you on this, but creativity does have some aspect in the IQ and the intelligence quotient, but it's also more to do with novelty and utility. Um, this is actually comes up a lot more with marketing. Um, and if you find that you have a very fluid method of developing solutions and ideas, this is actually to your benefit. So this is another piece that you want to take into account. And since it is trainable and there are ways to build up your creativity, you also, if you find you're not creative, you want to look into different ways, different opportunities to build that up. Um, Another piece is Price's law versus the Pareto principle. So the Pareto principle, it means 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people. There's actually a study by Price. Um, you could actually Google this Price's law, where the square root of your number of employees does 50% of the work. So if you have 100 employees, 10 employees do 50% of the work. If you have 1,000, if you have 10,000 employees, 100 employees do 50% of the work. And as you get bigger in corporations, you find that less and less people do most of the work. And if that's the case, you'd have to wonder what skill set do these amount of people, what skill set does this amount of people have to have? And if you think about the pieces that we were discussing before, those are aspects to their reputation, the quality of their work, and the way that they do and handle situations. So it doesn't make sense to kind of say, oh, there's so few rich people out in the world, and they're able to get it for themselves, and I'm miserable and I'm poor because of inequality, or because of racism, or because of prejudice. That's at this point in the game, there's enough research to back up that that's not the case. The case is that the people who make millions of dollars, that are successful, that are affluent, work 80 hours work weeks, are hustlers, carry themselves to the T in the best possible way, and are effective, efficient, and concise in the way that they do things. And if you're not building that skill set now, then when? When are you going to start? If you give up on yourself and you say, this professor doesn't know what he's talking about, this person doesn't know what he's talking about, the supervisor doesn't know, and you get frustrated with the process without giving it the 100% due diligence of actually going through it, I'm sorry. If you're a failure, that's on you, man. But if you give, I'm telling you, if you give your education, you give your career, you give your job 150% of yourself, I promise you that after making that sacrifice, eventually the opportunities will come, the blessings will come. But you yourself, you have to make the decision to go for it and to do it. And that was the class on communication, chapter 4, some of the pieces, as well as the quiz that we discussed. And this is a sensitive subject for me, anyways, because growing up and going through my education, I knew communication was a big piece of what people are missing as far as how to develop a message and get that across effectively. So if you have any questions, concerns, or comments about what was discussed here, or are just looking to discuss further, or are interested in some of the pieces or where I got the research, feel free to email me at this email over here. And again, this is Professor Suarez. Thank you so much for taking the time to review the class. Take care.